Yep.
And I will jump in and share my screen. So just give me 1 second. Okay, there we go. So I'd usually start and just say, please share your experience with coding because it's just us. If you want to just jump in and just tell me how much experience you've had with coding so far.
None at all.
None? Fantastic. That's going to make this session great. So it's definitely focused on early years, and as well there's Key Stage 1. I'm not sure, Chris, what year group you're in, sorry? Reception, fantastic. So I'll try and tailor this more so to early years, but it is worth saying that obviously all of this content can be used with Key Stage 1 as well. And hopefully you have downloaded the Scratch Jnr app. Yeah, brilliant. So the focus for today, I'll go through 3 sort of things. The first 2 I will go through quite quickly because it is sort of more a very hands-on session with Scratch Jnr. And the reason for that is I think often what we find is that we then we see a new tool and then we have to go away and try and learn it. So hopefully this session will just allow you to really see how much you can actually use it, and that it's not just something that can be used in computing, but actually it does tie really nicely into a lot of other subject areas as well. So why teach coding in early years and Key Stage 1? I think it's really important because coding does allow a lot more than just simply understanding how to create a program and how to actually create a game or code a game. But actually there's a lot of skills that come about in terms of building creativity, allowing for collaboration, being able to think critically as well, work through things logically. So it really allows for a lot more than just simply being able to code a program. And I always say to my learners that actually being able to finish and code something is not what I'm looking for. Fantastic if you get to that point, but actually what I'm looking for is that learning process that happens during coding, rather than just simply, fantastic, you created the game that I was looking for. I'm actually seeing what's happening during that process. So as I mentioned, these are some of the key areas that come up when you're teaching coding. So that ability to actually apply it to other subject areas is where that creativity, the storytelling, and the maths aspects come in. And that maths aspect as well is something that I always mention to teachers, is that we often do math discretely rather than actually bringing that into a lot of other subject areas. So I've found when I've taught coding before is that what often happens is that I will ask the children, when have you seen sort of a reference or an X and Y axis like this before? And it's something that actually hasn't come up in their maths lessons before. So they haven't talked about that X and Y axis when they're doing any graphing. And actually that comes into play a lot, even in Key Stage 1 and early years, where they have to sort of map out the point of where they're going to put their character. So starting to have those conversations is really helpful for that. So as I said, I'm going to go into sort of the unplugged coding, and in early years, this is something that you probably will use more so. And I think it's important to remember that it isn't just about it being a very discrete unplugged coding lesson, but actually that it's very much thinking about the computational aspects of code. And I will come to those after I've gone through this. And I always like to start with the unplugged before I go into the terminology, because I think what we often do is we try and think about those key concepts, algorithms and repetition and loops and things like that, and we get lost in what it is that we're trying to do. And unplugged coding can be as simple as doing a program as Simon says. So where you're getting them to essentially be robots, and rather than saying Simon says, you say programmer says, and then you can give those set of instructions. So it can be as simple as that. Another fun one that I like to start with and I've done this one in early years as well, is that this is a crazy characters one, and it's all about focusing on algorithms. And these come from the Barefoot Computing website, and there's lots of excellent resources on there. And what's nice is that it is really structured in that lesson content, so it doesn't sort of require a lot of work to actually start using them. And so, for example, the lesson essentially starts with the teacher going through and asking the children to follow an algorithm. And you would essentially say to them, okay, go and get a piece of paper. So I don't know if you have a piece of paper nearby and you want to have a go at doing this. And then essentially what you'd then ask them to do is you're going to ask them to follow an algorithm. And if they don't know what an algorithm is, you can say to them, okay, here's a set of instructions that I want you to follow just simply based on the instructions that I give you. And rather than obviously sort of giving them more than what it is, you actually, are quite specific in the instructions, and you say you can't ask questions, don't use a pencil, you have to use a pen, so that they can't obviously go back and rub it out and change it. So you'd give them the instructions like so. Draw a circle for the body. Add 2 eyes. Add a crown. Add some wings. Add 4 legs. And often at that point, when you'd then ask them to then show you, the one thing that you'd notice is that they will all have created a completely different looking monster. And the reason for that is just to sort of highlight to them how important an algorithm is. If we think about, the algorithm for making a sandwich, it's more than just get your bread, get some butter, get, whatever you're going to put on your sandwich, and then there you have it. Sandwich is done. It has to be really specific. So if we want someone to draw a monster in a certain way, we want to give children those specific instructions. And what they obviously learn during this process is actually, okay, an algorithm is that specific set of instructions that need to be followed. And then they actually then have to go and create their own instructions for the class to go and do so. And what's nice about that is that they actually suddenly start to realize, and they think that it's just that their friend's not following those instructions, but actually what happens is that they realize how important having those instructions are, so that when they give it, they can then come back to it as well. And you can see there that this is a different type of instruction that someone's then put together. And then you obviously get them to actually have a go at what that one friend did, and then another friend as well, so that they can compare just how different those instructions are when we take them and draw them. And that's exactly the way that our computer works. So there is a whole lot of different resources that you can go to find unplugged computing activities. So for example, code.org, and I'll share the resources at the end so that you can obviously have access to these. But code.org has a range of unplugged computing activities, and they range not only just from simply computer science concepts, but also digital citizenship as well. So there's computing aspects, then we go into sort of those coding terms, so sequencing, loops, events, binary, conditionals, look at the internet, functions, variables, algorithms, etc. So that's one place that you can go to. I also actually came across this spreadsheet, which actually is really nice because it has sort of a time factor. It does have the grade, but again, most of these lessons can be tweaked to sort of reach that early years aspect. It is just sort of going through and having a look. And a lot of them, they do all have those websites. Some of them are unplugged, but are using sort of a software to do that as well. And then there's a description of the task. So I thought that this is actually quite helpful to go to and find some different unplugged activities. As I mentioned, that activity did come from Barefoot, and there's a whole range of activities in here. One thing I would recommend is that, especially for early years, is to actually check out the SEND resources. This is just simply because a lot of those are very early. So if you're new to teaching computing and new to sort of how you can introduce that to your children, that's definitely a great spot to start with, because they are tailored for very early, new to computing, new to unplugged activities as well. So there's a whole range of lessons and guides, and we are looking at trying to schedule in a workshop as well, where they sort of will deep dive more thoroughly into these as well. So just stay tuned for when we release that one. And there's also posters and trackers and things like that that you can access as well. So in terms of that unplugged computing, it is just sort of worth mentioning that it's having those opportunities and really getting children to understand that computing in itself doesn't have to be just done at a computer, and actually understanding those concepts that come into play when they use a computer, when they're going into code a game on Scratch, is really important as well. And sometimes it can just be simply having those blocks that they might use in Scratch and giving them to them so they actually have the physical blocks and they can start to put them together. And they can think, okay, what might happen? And this sort of builds on that aspect of Bluebot or Bbot. So if you've ever done those before, you'll sort of be aware that you have those different online apps that you can use where you can then move those characters around. So that's always a really helpful thing to be able to do there. So that's one way. If you've never used sort of the Bbot app, I definitely recommend giving that a go, because it is a great way to just sort of introduce them to that sort of initial concept of coding and following, and then, you know, going back and sort of debugging those errors that come through. So in terms of that computational thinking, this is very much what grounds what computing is built upon. And I sort of do want to jump in and just say that I had never taught coding before. I was a classroom teacher prior to taking on the role as a computing teacher, and I'd had no experience. I'd never looked at coding because we had a teacher, an ICT teacher, that used to do that, and I just thought, no, coding's not going to become something that is my responsibility, so I'll just leave it to the side. And suddenly I had to actually go and learn what this was all about. And initially when I started teaching computing, I had all of the planning there, so I was able just to pick it up. But actually what I found was when I went through and really unpacked what the computational thinking was, it came down to that deeper why. So as teachers, we're always thinking about why. Why is it that I need to teach the children how to do this? Or what is the importance behind doing this assessment or doing this lesson or setting up this activity for them to engage in? And understanding why they need to know certain things, but also the approaches that you can do to allow that to take place, really gives them a wider opportunity to understand. So that computational thinking really comes down and underpins that unplugged, but also what they take into when they're coding as well. So I won't obviously read through this, but I think there's sort of on the left-hand side here, the concepts, that is actually what makes and what you use to code. And then the approaches are on the right-hand side. And again, all of these can be done both unplugged and in coding as well. And it's very important as well to actually incorporate those when you are coding. So giving them that opportunity to tinker, have a play, test all the buttons, see what happens, give them that opportunity to create. So today you're going to use Scratch to actually tell a story or to debug. So that's where you actually give them a program that's not working. And this could just simply be finding one that's finished. And I'll show you where a whole bunch of ready-made Scratch games are that you can actually then just go in, take a couple of blocks of code away, and then ask them to test it and see where it goes wrong. See what's supposed to happen, see if they can work out what's supposed to happen, and then go and see what do they think needs to happen to fix it. And it's that persevering. So whenever they're coding, they will have to persevere. It's never going to go right the first time. And that's where being able to work together is quite important as well. And again, this just builds on sort of that wider level of programming concepts that are needed when you actually go to sort of create a program. So everything that we use, every app is built on that computer programming. And the sort of key things to note, we always use inputs every day. So that's our keyboard, it's our microphone, and then those outputs is actually what we then see on the screen. So things like our screen being displayed right now, our camera once we see that physical image. And then built around that is that programming. So repetition, and these are all the concepts that are really important to unpack. So just simply repeating. So, you know, just a simple unplugged activity is repeat what I do, and getting children to actually repeat and do that same thing. Selection, sequencing is quite an easy one. So the sequence of how they pack their bag or how they get ready in the morning, brushing their teeth. And then variables. And variables is one that we don't often, and we do sort of keep to Key Stage 2, but I think it's quite helpful to actually introduce to them that variables are something that we think about every day. And if we can bring that into early years and really consider, okay, if it's going to rain today, then what do I need to do? Then I probably need to make sure I have an umbrella or a raincoat so that when I do go out, if it is raining, I'm not going to get wet. So thinking about those everyday variables, you know, if we're hungry, we're probably going to go and eat. So I always, you know, variables are focused around that if then aspect. And that's, you know, something that we do all the time. You know, if we're hot, then we take our jacket off. Okay. If it's our birthday, then we celebrate. So it's just getting them to understand how those variables work and just using that common language as well on a daily basis. So we are going to jump into Scratch now, which is probably the fun part of today. And so you'll need to make sure, obviously, that you can see both screens, or feel free just to listen ahead to me and I will go through. So just to very quickly show you, most of this is documented in the slides that I'll come back to at the end, but I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a second and jump into full screen sharing now. Okay, perfect. So to get onto Scratch, if I'm on a Chromebook, then I can just simply swipe up and I can find where Scratch Jnr is, and I can click on to open it. Just give me a thumbs up. Let me know if you can't see my screen, if that hasn't come through. It is worth saying that it is just a touchscreen app. So if you are on your Chromebook, you can't use your trackpad to do anything, but you can obviously go through and just simply tap to be able to access anything. Now, this is, once you tap onto Scratch, it may come up the first time you log in, just so that you're aware, it may come up with a screen that says, are you using this at school or at home? And obviously you can just tap on school. It doesn't make any difference, to be honest, but it's just to say that that is there. Now, these are actually all projects that I found, and I will show you where they all are. It's just fantastic that you can obviously go in, take a project that's already complete. And as I mentioned, this is where you could obviously go through and tweak it and change it. A couple of things just to point out. The question mark at the top does have a quick intro video. So if you are completely new to using Scratch, then you can simply tap on this and play that video. I'm not going to play it now, but that's where you can go through and do that. Along the right, there is also the settings wheel. So if you want to change the language, you can go through and do that as well. And then the book at the right does give you a bit of an information about Scratch Jnr. So it is very much an introductory programming app, and it builds on that sort of early stage of Scratch. So in Key Stage 2, we actually moved to using Scratch as our main programming language that they use. And that's all because it's a very simple coding language to use. It's very much about snapping jigsaw pieces together that then allow characters to move, jump, dance, sing, anything you want to do. And obviously they can come to life to tell that story. So Again, Scratch Junior can be used all the way through until year 2, and then by which point I'd start to say that you definitely want to get them onto Scratch, just because there's so much more that they can do when they get onto it. And what I do want to point out is across the bottom of the screen here, you have an interface guide. So the first time you get onto using Scratch, it might be quite helpful to have a go. And you can see that all of these icons are tappable. So you can simply tap through. So if you want to know what each of the buttons do, you can simply go through and learn how to use Scratch. Then you've also got a paint editor guide. Again, you can go through and work out what each of the buttons mean. And there's also a blocks guide as well that goes through what each of the blocks do. So again, you can simply scroll through so you understand each of these blocks. Now, whilst these are all in the Scratch Jnr app, you can also get them online. And I'll show you where they are as well, because what's quite handy is that they can be downloaded. So you can download these as PDFs, and the blocks, you can actually download the blocks as almost, so I think from memory, there's 2 blocks per A4 page. And what I used to do was I used to print them out, and because they have no labels on them, so there's both a labeled set and an unlabeled set, you can actually talk to them and ask the children what they think this button might do. And then obviously, if there's any complex ones, that's where you can go through and sort of describe to them exactly what it is that they do. Are there any questions so far? Feel free just to unmute.
Yeah, not at the moment.
Fantastic. So if you tap on the home page and then tap on the plus, this will then launch that project page. Now, I'm not sure sort of what topic you're doing, but it's up to you. You can obviously do one around a topic that you're looking at. I always like to go under the sea. So what I'm going to do first is actually set up my background. So to set up my background, I just tap on the image at the top, and this brings up a range of backgrounds. Now, once you start building up projects, what you'll see is across the top here, this actually is any backgrounds that you've already made or changed or reused for other ones. And then below is actually all of the sort of pre-populated ones that are there. So you can just select a background that you'd like to use. And again, once you have selected one, it will just simply populate in. It's also worth saying as well that if you just come back, you can paint your own. So if you tap on the paintbrush, this will allow you to go in. You can tap on one of the colors at the bottom of the screen, use the paint bucket, and that will then paint the background. Going through, if you wanted to sort of add maybe some sort of lines in, you can go through and do that. You sort of have that circle. So if you wanted to add any circles in, you can go through and do that. Again, exactly the same, squares, triangles as well. So you've always got that ability to sort of add. And anything that you do populate in as well, you can move just simply by using that arrow. So if you want to sort of create greater curves, you can do that with your line. So that's one of the great things that I like, is that it actually does give you full functionality once you've drawn those lines to go back in using that move tool. You've also got sort of refresh. So if you do want to sort of angle or move anything around or rotate it, you can do that. The stamp is actually your clone tool. So when you tap on it, it will then clone it, and you can then reposition where you want. Scissors, cut as normal. And you've also got the ability to add or take a photo straight away. I'll come back to that when we get into our characters, but that's just to show you you've got that option there. And you can see that will then apply it to that background. Now, on the right-hand side here is actually where you can add multiple backgrounds. So essentially, this is where you can start to create a story, because you can have that scene of what takes place within the story. Across the top, just so that you're aware, this one is your full screen. So if you just want to see it from the sort of play screen, so this is what I would always teach the children, that actually this is where we actually get to play our game, or we get to play the story, which is something that they are very familiar with because they're used to using things like YouTube or, you know, going onto an app and actually clicking play, but they're not quite familiar when they have code down the bottom of their screen and they're just simply pressing a green flag to start. So that's just something to bear in mind as well. Going further across the top, you've also got a bar, and what this does when you tap onto it is it actually shows you that grid reference. So like I mentioned before, you have that grid reference, and you can see here that each square has its own grid. So if I drag the cat, a scratch cat around, you'll see that those numbers do move up and down. So this sort of comes into play more so when I actually start to program my character, but that's what that grid reference is for, so that you know. You've also got your ABC. Now this is actually where you can start to add the title. So if you're creating a story, and mine's going to be Under the Sea, like so, I can change the font size. So if I want that nice and big, and if I want to change that color, I can do that like so. And again, I can position that where it is that I want it to be. So again, this is how you can start to sort of tell that story. So what I want to do now is I actually want to remove the scratch cat. So what I can do is I can just press and hold on the scratch cat, and that will then bring up a red X to delete. And then it will go away. Now, what you'll notice is that the code blocks do disappear from the bottom of the screen. So you do actually have to have a sprite, and I always talk to the children about this, is that you have to have a sprite, which is known as your character, to be able to actually code anything. So otherwise, it is just a background with a picture. So we tap on that plus, and again, what you'll notice is because I've got projects already within, they are going to come up with those used characters at the top there. So just worth noting that if you're using shared iPads or Chromebooks or any device, that they will appear there for every child that goes on. So just be mindful of that. You know, we often had some that would go onto a shared device and suddenly think, they aren't my characters. And what they didn't realize is actually they just need to scroll down and they will see those pre-programmed characters that are here. Oh, let me just come back. Here we go. So I can go through, and I'm first of all just going to start with a seahorse. Now, I can press that tick, which will automatically insert it on. But what I'm going to do is actually going into the paintbrush. Now, when I tap on the paintbrush, what this allows me to do is to change anything on my seahorse. So I could go in and I could change the colors. So again, this is just a nice little thing to be able to show them that they can go through and do. And I can simply just tap on that tick. So we've suddenly got our first character. I can then go through and add another one in. So this time I'm going to go for a fish. And I'm just going to double tap it to insert it on. And again, I can put it in. Now, wherever I position my character is actually where it's going to start. So I'm just simply pressing on the screen and dragging it. So for this one, I'm going to have them all on that sort of left-hand side of the screen. And this little icon at the top here, this blue one, I know you won't be able to see. So it's just this little blue one here. This one allows that character to move back to the start. So once you've actually started to program your characters to move, what will happen is that at the end of the program, unless you ask them to go back to the start, they will always be sort of moving forward. So for this one, we're actually just going to have our fish and our seahorse swim across the page. You might decide to have sort of other characters and do different things. But for this one, I'm going to do Under the Sea, and we're going to have our fish sort of swim across the page. So what I can do is we're first going to go with our fish. And you'll notice that you have these blocks down the bottom. So these are your code blocks. And we need to sort of teach the children that these blocks have to snap together like a jigsaw piece. So they can't just simply be sort of apart from each other. They do actually need to snap together. Now, it's worth noting as well that the first block that is selected and that you always will see are the movement blocks. So your movement blocks are the blue blocks. However, a program doesn't start with a movement block. And we know that because for a jigsaw, we always need to have sort of that edge piece that we start with. And that edge piece is actually the yellow ones. So these are called our event blocks. Now, if you are familiar with Scratch, then these colors are quite similar to the colors you would see in Scratch as well. So there's that nice crossover between. So there are three sort of essential starting blocks. So you have a green flag. This means that the program will start when you press that green flag at the top here. So you can see there that the character does flash because there's currently that on them. The other one that I can do, so for this one, I'm going on the seahorse, I'm actually going to add a when touch. So this means that I actually have to touch the seahorse for it to start whatever it is I'm going to do. The last one is actually a bump. So essentially, I always describe this as almost like playing chase or playing tag. So the character actually has to touch the other character for it to start. So again, you've always got those three options there for you to do. The other two at the end are your communication ones. So they sort of a more advanced feature that you go into later in Key Stage 1, and that's about sort of having that message conversation. I have done it in Year 1 and had great success, and there's some really good lessons that go into how you actually structure that conversation, but I would just sort of recommend that you sort of approach that slowly. You want to make sure that they understand the other blocks first. So coming back to our fish, we do want to get our fish to move across the screen. So we are going to snap together that first piece. Now I always say to them, will this work? So we test our green flag by pressing it and nothing happens. But if we snap together that first one, a couple of things to note is that children will often go and just press this green flag. It doesn't matter whether they press this one or the green flag at the top here. Both will work. If they go into that full screen view at the top, they would just have to press that green flag. And you can see there, when we do that, our fish does move forward. As I mentioned, if I keep pressing that green flag, you can see that that fish is going to continue to move forward. Now, those squares, so that grid reference that we used earlier, is actually where we can sort of count and use our maths to work out how many spaces forward I would need to get it to move to the edge of the screen. So if we're at 4, so that's where our fish is currently, okay, we would know that we need to get to 20. So I know that I need to change this to 16. So I could go through, and this is, again, something that, let's just try that again. I didn't like that. Okay, so I could go through and put 16 blocks out like that. And it is worth saying to, and having these conversations, and this is why tinkering is really important, to get children to actually notice what happens when they add multiple blocks. So they can go through like this, and we can see when we press that green flag that it follows that. But they could also, and you'll notice that to delete blocks, I just simply drag it above the bar. So I can just tap on that number and it will bring up a little keypad and I can say 16. Again, now you'll notice that that fish has now gone all the way around and continued back. So actually what I do want to make sure is that wherever I set the starting position, so my fish is now at the side of the screen, and rather than just press that green flag, this time I'm actually going to use that blue arrow to return it to its starting position. Now you will notice as well that there is actually a block that I can code for it to do that automatically. And this is where we start to get used to that idea of how a program works, of going back to the start. So we actually have to program it to do that if that's what we want to happen in our program. So what I'd like you to do is obviously have a play with some of the other buttons and see what they do. So you can see that you've got some sort of rotation. We can see what happens when we do this one. So this essentially allows it to go up. And you'll notice when you use this one, if you say, for example, went up 3, you'll see it goes up as well. So it's just this one sort of goes up and stays up, whereas our other one almost jumps up and comes down. So have a go at using some of those and getting your fish to sort of swim across, or whatever you're sort of programming right now, have a go at using those movement blocks. The next thing that I'm going to go into is just having a look. We're going to get our seahorse to move across as well. And what we might like to do is actually so this time when I tap on the seahorse, and my fingers just tapped onto that seahorse on the screen, it will come over to that page. So what I might like to do now is I actually want to get them to the next scene. So I'm going to use a second backdrop. Now, what you'll notice is that when I add a second scene or a second backdrop, it will add that cat back in. And this is because each scene is its own. So again, I can just simply delete that there. And I'm going to change that background. So we actually are going to go into that sea there. So we can start that story. And actually what I am going to do is I can just continue that on if I wanted to. I'm going to return them back to that starting position. So to actually utilize that second background, what I can do is I can code, or I can snap these jigsaw pieces together for that to happen. So your pink blocks, just so that you know, are your sort of talking blocks and also your size blocks. So you can grow and shrink your characters and you can return them to that central size. And then these ones on the end are your hide, so almost your vanish block, and then your reappear block here. Going further down, you have your microphone. So this is where you can actually start to tell the story. So I'll come back to that in a second. And then you have your orange blocks. And these are sort of your control blocks. So this is where you can set how long they do something for, that they need to stop and wait. And then you can also change how fast they go. So for this one, you can see a slow walk, a quick jog, and then a run. So I'm going to make my seahorse run, and I'm going to make my fish sort of slowly jog. And then all I need to do to actually start the program is I can press that green flag, and you'll see that my fish starts swimming. Now, you'll probably say, why hasn't the seahorse done anything? And you'll remember that I actually controlled that seahorse to only start when I tap onto it. And you can see there just that difference. So we can start to create almost like a race because I can go, oh, we need to get that seahorse to see who can win first. And again, you may even like to then use that time block to sort of slow them down and then stop them as well. Now, this one at the end is your repeat. So again, you could just simply use a move block and then actually use a repeat and get it to repeat those set of instructions based on a specific amount of time. So for again, I'm going to return them to that starting position. And what you'll notice is that it's going to continue moving through that until it suddenly stops after X amount of time there. So the last block is the red ones. And these are simply that sort of end of the code. So I can use those. They don't really do anything, but it is just sort of getting them used to that point of, okay, once that block's there, that's actually when it does stop. It won't just continue going. The next one, I'm sure you can imagine, will be a forever loop. So that's where we come into that looping that I mentioned earlier, and that will just continue to run that program forever until, and this is again something that you need to teach them, until you actually press that red stop at the top. So again, this will run forever, even though I've got that 4 repetition loop here. Because I've now added on that red loop, this will go on forever until I use that red stop. like so. And you can see that it's just going to keep going because I actually need to take it off. Okay, so that's just what that's there for. So if there is things that you want to continue to go through the program, that would be what you'd use. Now we actually want to have something take place and then switch backgrounds. So that's where we can actually use that switch background to scene 2 once it's done that. So if we return our characters to the start, tap on that green flag, tap on our seahorse, you'll notice that once our seahorse has gone through 4 times across the screen, it will suddenly change to our second backdrop. And again, this is probably where I then want to bring in my characters again. So I can simply tap on that seahorse to add it back in. And again, just simply select that fish. And actually, during this part of the scene, we may decide to add a third character in. Oh, not that one. So for our third character, what I wanted to show you, my screen's just frozen, sorry. Let me try that once more. No. Oh, that's very frustrating. I apologize. I don't know why my screen has frozen, but what I wanted to show you is that there is a way, and there are some characters, and I'm going to jump in and use this one to show you that there are characters within the library that are pre-programmed with no face on. And this is actually where you can get your children to personalize their stories and personalize anything that they create, because they can add their photos in. So just using this one here, you can see that there's already a face there. And to do that, all they need to do is they can tap onto that camera icon, and then all they need to do is actually tap where it is that they want the camera to appear. This was something I actually had to teach them, and they took quite a while for some of them to get used to the fact of that. But once they realized that they would just need to tap onto that icon for it to then come through, they were then able to sort of allow that camera to come in. Now, mine hasn't come up as my permissions. I'm just wondering if it's because, no, it's still going through. Let's just try again. So there we go. So we've got our diver. Okay, so I might need to see what's going on there, but essentially what should happen is it should add that ability to add your camera in there. I might just need to check on the permissions level as to why it's blocking it. It could be just because I'm on Google Meet and it doesn't like it to go through. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to simply add in a face on here, like so. And there we go. So we've suddenly got that sort of extra character, which they've seen on that sort of third level there. So if I want to, I can just drag it across. So you can see there as well that when you have your characters on the side, you can just simply drag them. So your characters in scene 1, you can click, hold on your character, drag it across to scene 2. So if I added another scene in, again, just to show you, you can simply drag that and that will then populate it across as well. So once you've got those characters in, again, what you might like to do is just to start to sort of populate. So for this one, I might like to do that sort of bounce one. So actually when my fish is going to reach my person, that's actually when I'm going to use that option there. So this is how I can then go through and start to program when it's moving. So I can go through and I might say it's about 5. So let me just go in. And on my scuba diver, what I'm going to do is when it's actually tapped onto there, I'm going to get it to say, so I'm going to use a pink block, and now I can type. So I can say, like that. So when I press that green flag, you can see as soon as that fish touches the scuba diver, it's then going to say that message. Now, that's just using the type option. What I can also do is if I tap onto the voice or the speaker, you've got sound. So you can add that pop sound that you keep hearing come up. Or if you tap on the microphone, this is actually where in early years, this is such a great way for children to tell their own stories and actually talk through what's happening. So to record, you just simply press on that record button and it's going to record everything that you say. So I'm going to do that again. Oh, wow, look at all the fish underneath the sea. And what you'll notice is it adds a number to that recording there that can then be dragged down like that. So again, I'm just going to press that green flag now. Did you actually hear that come through?
Faintly.
Did you hear that come through? Sorry.
No, only little faintly.
It just went crazy loud in my ears. So I know obviously you can't hear that, and I won't toggle my sound off just because I'm in a meeting room, but that's just to say that obviously that does work. It is very quick and intuitive for them to be able to do. So if they're still struggling to use the keyboard or they're not sort of used to using that, that microphone option is quite helpful for them to go through and tell that story. And again, you can start to obviously work through using those other buttons as well within. And then again, because you've started to add other scenes, you can always then switch back as well. So when things start to populate through your story, you can always jump between scenes. So this is just that nice way to develop it. Once you've sort of developed your story, your game that you're creating, I will just quickly show you some examples, is that you can export it using this yellow tag at the top right corner of the screen there. It will then ask you to enter in a name. So I'm just going to say Under the Sea, and I can then just tap on the tick. And that is the project then saved. So I can come back. I've always got that project there. If I want to delete the project, I just simply press on the X. Otherwise, I can open it back up. If I tap on the for parents when it comes to that saving, I can press the correct answer. So it will populate with a maths question there. And you'll get the option to share this by email. So again, what's actually nice about this is that it does link to your Google Drive. So I can actually save this to my Google Drive, and that's now saved. So that will then upload it. You'll notice that the file format is saved as a Scratch Jnr file. So if you were to, say, for example, upload this to Seesaw once it's on Google Drive or to Classroom, anywhere like that, people can download the file, but they can't open it unless they have the Scratch Jnr app, if that makes sense. So that's just something to bear in mind, that there's no way to obviously physically see it unless they actually go through and open it in the Scratch Jnr app, which is essentially where all of these projects have come from. So for example, you can see here on this Knock Knock project, again, this is a project that was Freddie made. So when I press on the green flag, And what you won't have heard there is the actual knock knock joke taking place, as you can see with those microphones that are there. So if I come back again, this is another one, which is just a dance party. And again, quite a fun one that children love to do. It's quite easy. You can give them X amount of time and they have to go through and then obviously create something there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump back to my presentation. So, let me just stop presenting for a second. So I've lost my slide deck. Apologies. Okay, here we go. How did you go coding your game?
Not bad. I managed to get.
Or coding a story.
Yeah, I managed to get my face on there.
Fantastic. At least yours worked.
Not boasting.
Well, you know, this is the whole thing. Anytime that you have to do a Google Meet and use your camera, it always just rejects it and knocks it out. Yeah. So as I mentioned, all of the sort of quick things that I went through are in the slide deck, and, you know, just goes through sort of those features. There are links to lessons, excuse me. So this is a lesson that is linked. So when you go through this slide deck, you'll be able to tap onto it. So for example, if you want to teach them a very quick, simple lesson, this takes you all the way through the process. So choose a background first, then choose your character. So you could set these up on a table with some devices and then get your children to actually work through it because they've got those instructions that they need to follow. Again, making the sunset. So that's where you can start to use that vanishing icon and getting that sun to actually disappear. Again, this is just a further breakdown that goes from start to finish and how you use those buttons again. So as I mentioned with Scratch, it's very much focused around those blocks. So introduce those printed blocks first before you get them on to actually coding onto Scratch, and then give them a tinker. So this is what we call giving them essentially 5 minutes, 10 minutes, however long you think they need. I would always cap it at 10. So for early years, I would, you know, say no longer than 5 minutes, where you say to them, just have a go, see what happens. Press any button, and I want you to come back and then tell me what happens when you press those buttons. And then give them that opportunity to play. So give them a project that's already finished. It could be one that you've made for them. It could be one that you find from that website that I'm going to show you in a moment. And then explore those more specific aspects. So, okay, now that you've created a little story, let's go in and see if we can get our character to repeat jumping up and down or throwing a ball or swimming across the screen. All of those things is what you need to do. And then obviously you can then go into that sort of learning aspect of unpacking the curriculum and then seeing how they can use this to share what it is that they're learning or link it to their topic area. So just some quick tips. The green flag starts the program. Those numbers, as I mentioned, you have that grid reference. So there are 20 spaces across the screen. So if you always remember, 8 to 10 will get you halfway. And then the orange blocks. So whenever you're using that weight block, they work in tens. So again, that maths link comes in nicely. So for 10 is 1 second, 20 is 2 seconds. And then in terms of those activities, as I mentioned, the printable code blocks, all of these are linked. So you'll be able to go directly to those. There's that play aspect. Again, this takes you through that direct lesson. This one will take you into animating genres, collage, story, games. So there's more linked there. Again, these ones focus on how you can use Scratch in literacy and maths. Again, they are quite limited examples. So they're focusing more so on phonics and numbers, but quite an easy one to introduce that in. And obviously you can be a little bit more creative than just having a scratch cat and the letters or the numbers. So you can actually really start to tell a story through this. And then there are assessments. Again, this is probably more so for Key Stage 1, but just to say that there are assessments that are linked in here. And then, as I said, there are a whole range of resources. So there's the unplugged ones that I mentioned. There's the Scratch Jnr, which goes into, I'll just quickly take you through these. I am conscious of time. So I won't go through the unplugged because I've already gone through them. But Boot Up is a whole range of those ready-made lessons. So all of the ones that I quickly showed you before do come from here, and they have videos that actually play the project so you can see them in action. But you've also got lesson plans. So they have a full lesson plan, and there's a whole range of links to standards. Now, they aren't the UK national curriculum standards, but obviously it does go through quite in depth what it is that they're going to do. And then they go into sort of what is it that they're actually going to learn, what are the key coding concepts, the scratch blocks that they're going to learn, and the vocab. So really, really thorough lesson plans. And then they've also got that sample project file. So this is actually where you can download it and then open it in Scratch. So when you go through, that's where you'll be able to find them. And then again, preparation, getting started. So there is a lot in here. That is my first place to go to for any content. There's also a website here that has lots of videos, how-to guides, and in particular, these two books, I've actually linked these into the slide decks because I just think I've never seen them before, and they're actually really incredible resources. So they are these ones here. So you'll see here just a really full comprehensive breakdown. It goes into how you can actually structure a lesson over a series of time, going through things like repeats, debugging, programming. So there's lots in there, lots to read, but actually lots of good lesson planning content that's broken down specifically as well. So it's a little bit more condensed than the first one, but again, there is a lot in here. And also just to say that the Scratch Jnr, as I mentioned, all of these are in the app, but you'll actually be able to go through and download these as a PDF. There's also the tips and hints as well. So it goes through how to make and rename projects, really helpful on shared devices that you get children to either export them onto your Google Drive or get them to name their project so that you know that that is theirs. And then again, how you add multiple characters, how you use the trigger blocks, how you share projects. And again, that sort of list does go on there. I realize I'm right on crunch time, so I am going to stop presenting and just check in if there are any questions that you have.
No, thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'll leave it there. I will just very quickly give you that slide deck. So I'll just pop that into the chat. And I will say thank you so much. Obviously, it's hard being the only one, but I do really appreciate. And I would love to see your Scratch project as well. So if you are happy to, please upload it to Google Drive and share. It's always nice actually seeing what people have done. Or if you're on Twitter, feel free just to upload a picture there as well. But thank you and have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Bye.